Do you think the Nancy Guthrie case, if they end up getting a good profile, could be the case where, for the first time, these companies are forced to let law enforcement in?
There is a single strand of hair sitting inside a laboratory in San Francisco right now, and if it belongs to the person who took Nancy Guthrie, the forensic experts working that evidence say it will not just help the case. According to C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogy specialist who has personally helped solve 6 cases using this exact type of evidence, it will solve it. That is where this investigation stands today. Not stuck, not cold, closer than it has ever been. But to understand what that means and why this particular week changed everything in the Nancy Guthrie case, we need to go back to the beginning. Not to February 1st, though we will get there. Back further than that. Back to who Nancy Guthrie actually is, because in the coverage of this case, that part sometimes gets lost under the weight of timelines and forensic terms and investigative theories, and she deserves more than that. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has lived in Tucson, Arizona for more than 5 decades. She raised 3 children on her own after her husband passed away when she was just 46 years old. She attended the same church for 30 years without missing a single Sunday, and she was known in her community for her warmth, her sharpness, and her independence. She was the kind of woman who lived her life quietly, predictably, and with purpose. Her hearing aids were on her nightstand every night. Her medication was on the kitchen counter. Her routines were steady and consistent. That steady, consistent life is part of what made what happened to her so deeply alarming to everyone who knew her. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy returned home after spending time with family. Everything about that evening appeared completely normal. She was home, she was settled. And then, sometime in the early hours of February 1st, something happened inside that house that has not been fully explained publicly yet. Here is what investigators have confirmed. At exactly 1:47 in the morning, the camera connected to Nancy's front door was physically disconnected. Not a battery issue, not a technical glitch, physically removed. About 25 minutes later, a motion sensor on the property registered movement, but there was no footage to go with it. Something was there. The camera was already gone. And then, at 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. That was the last confirmed signal tied to her. After that, nothing. When family members went to check on her later that morning after she did not appear at church, they found her belongings exactly where she had left them. Her phone was on the nightstand, her car was in the garage, her personal items were still inside the house, and on the front porch there was blood, confirmed to be hers. That detail, the blood on the front porch, has been one of the most significant pieces of physical evidence in this entire investigation. And this week, for the first time, a retired FBI profiler explained publicly exactly what that blood tells us. Jim Clemente, who spent his career at the FBI analyzing crime scenes and behavioral evidence, appeared on NewsNation's Brian Entin Investigates and delivered a forensic breakdown that changes how the final moments of Nancy's time in that house need to be understood. According to his publicly available analysis, the positioning and pattern of the blood drops reveal something very specific. Nancy Guthrie's face, at the moment that blood was produced, was within approximately 1 foot of the ground. She was either on her knees, hunched over, or lying face down at her own front threshold. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden had previously described the drops as donut-shaped with pale centers. That specific shape, according to Bodden's analysis, is consistent with blood that comes from the nose or mouth and is mixed with air. In other words, Nancy was coughing up blood, or the blood was dripping from her nose right there on the porch as she was being moved out of her home. And here is something that does not get discussed enough. The interior of that house was completely undisturbed. No overturned furniture, no broken objects, no signs of a physical struggle inside those walls. Whatever happened that produced that blood happened at the threshold, at the exit point, right as she was being taken out. Clemente drew one more conclusion from the blood evidence, and it directly addresses one of the biggest questions that has been circulating in this case. He believes there was only one suspect involved. His reasoning is straightforward. If two people had been present, one of them would have had full control of Nancy inside the house before they reached the door. The fact that she ended up face down on the porch coughing blood tells him the situation was harder to manage than a two-person operation would suggest. One person, one suspect. That conclusion, combined with the physical description already in the public record, is the most specific the suspect profile has ever been. And it is the starting point for everything that has happened in this investigation in the days since. Because there is a hair sample recovered from that scene that is now sitting in a laboratory that has already proven it can do the impossible. And in part 2, we are going to walk through exactly what happened to that evidence, why it was delayed for 11 weeks, who was responsible for that delay, and what the science says could happen next. That hair sample did not arrive at the San Francisco laboratory quickly, and the reason it didn't is one of the most troubling parts of this entire investigation, because the delay was not caused by a backlog or a processing issue or limited resources. According to a senior Pima County official who went on the record this week, the delay was caused by something far more personal. Let's walk through exactly what happened. When investigators recovered a hair sample from Nancy Guthrie's home, the FBI requested that evidence so their laboratory at Quantico could begin analysis. That request came in over 2 months ago. But the Pima County Sheriff's Office, which is the department leading the ground investigation under Sheriff Chris Nanos, did not send the sample to Quantico. Instead, they routed it to a private laboratory in Florida. 11 weeks passed. The evidence sat in that Florida lab while the FBI's facility waited. It finally arrived at the right laboratory weeks after it should have. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer said publicly that this timeline was not tracking at all, that the Guthrie family should be upset, that in a case of this priority, this kind of delay is not consistent with how federal kidnapping investigations are supposed to be handled. And then a senior Pima County official named Dr. Hines made a public statement that explained why it may have happened. According to Dr. Hines, Sheriff Chris Nanos has carried a grudge against the FBI since 2015, when Nanos was nearly indicted on RICO charges. The charges were not ultimately pursued, but the relationship between Nanos and the Bureau was seriously damaged. Dr. Hines stated publicly that it was very possible that Nanos' history with the FBI and the personal animosity that history produced jeopardized elements of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. That is not a rumor. That is not speculation from a blog or a social media account. That is a named official on the record, making a specific claim about a specific institutional relationship that may have directly affected the handling of the most critical piece of forensic evidence in this case. An 84-year-old woman is still missing, and the evidence that may identify who took her sat in the wrong laboratory for 11 weeks. That evidence is now in the right place. According to publicly available reporting and the analysis of forensic expert C.C. Moore, the hair sample recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home is now at a laboratory in San Francisco. And this is not a random facility. This is the same laboratory that played a documented role in the conviction of Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, earlier this year. What made that case so significant from a forensic standpoint is that the evidence in question was rootless hair, meaning hair without an attached follicle, the same type of evidence present in the Nancy Guthrie case. Rootless hair has historically been considered one of the most difficult types of evidence to extract usable DNA from. This laboratory proved that it can be done. They extracted a DNA profile from rootless hair samples connected to Heuermann, and that profile contributed to a guilty plea in 8 murders spanning nearly 2 decades. C.C. Moore, who has personally helped law enforcement solve 6 cases using rootless hair alone, made a statement this week that is worth sitting with for a moment. She said, "If they really do have a rootless hair and it is from that kidnapper, then this is going to be the piece of information that will solve the case. Not help the case, solve it. And because this is an active investigation, not a cold case, she believes the laboratory will push this sample to the top of their priority list." Now, while that evidence is being processed, something else happened this week that changed how investigators and the public need to think about the ransom notes that dominated early coverage of this case. A California man identified as Colella has been indicted by a federal grand jury. His trial is now set for June 23rd at the federal courthouse in Tucson. He is not charged in connection with a note sent to a media outlet. He is charged for sending text messages directly to two members of the Guthrie family on February 4th, asking whether they received a Bitcoin payment and pressing for a transaction to be completed. Investigators established that he was an impersonator, someone who monitored the public coverage of this case and attempted to exploit the family's desperation for financial gain. That arrest matters beyond the individual charge. Savannah Guthrie said publicly, before returning to the Today Show, that she believed two of the ransom notes in this case were legitimate. She drew a clear line between what was real and what was not. She said those two specific notes contained details about the interior of the home, damage to exterior fixtures, and the placement of personal items, details that had never been made public and that she believed could only have come from someone with actual access to that house. Colella's arrest does not address those two notes. He is confirmed as an impersonator. But his arrest, combined with former FBI agent Steve Moore's public analysis that all of the ransom demands were made in bad faith, with no proof of life and no completed transactions, confirms something important. The ransom narrative that dominated the first 83 days of public conversation in this case was largely noise, and while that noise filled the airwaves, the physical evidence was sitting in the record waiting to be examined at the level it deserved. Brian Entin, the journalist who has covered this case from the beginning, returned to Tucson not with a new witness or a confession, but with a question. He asked what does not fit. And when you apply that question to the pre-incident footage, the answer becomes significant. The FBI flagged doorbell footage from January 11th as significant to this investigation, that is 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Separately, Fox News Digital reported the existence of a second doorbell image showing a masked figure in different clothing and without the backpack and holstered firearm visible in the February 1st footage. The same porch, a different visit. Which means whoever was on that threshold the night Nancy was taken had likely been there before, studying the house, the camera angles, the lighting, and the routines of the one person who lived inside. The suspect profile, as it stands today, is the most specific it has ever been. Male. Approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build. Black mustache. According to former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer's publicly available analysis, significantly younger than 50. One person. Familiar with that home before February 1st. Careful enough to plan, but not careful enough to avoid leaving two things behind: blood on a front porch and a single strand of hair. When you step back and look at everything this investigation has produced over the past 83 days, something becomes very clear. This case has never been without evidence. What it has been without, until recently, is the right people looking at the right evidence in the right way at the right time. That is changing. And the change is happening fast enough now that the people closest to this investigation are using a word publicly that they have been careful with for months. The word is solvable. Let's bring everything together because you deserve to see the full picture, not just the individual pieces. On February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman who had lived quietly and independently in Tucson for more than 50 years, was taken from her home in the early hours of the morning. Her camera was physically removed at 1:47 a.m. Her pacemaker went silent at 2:28 a.m. The interior of her home was left completely undisturbed, which tells investigators the situation was controlled up until the moment it wasn't. And the blood on her front porch, the blood that retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente analyzed this week in forensic detail, tells us exactly where that control broke down. At the threshold, at the exit point. Right there on her own front steps, Nancy Guthrie ended up face down or hunched over, within a foot of the ground, coughing blood, as one person attempted to move her out of the home she had lived in for decades. That moment, the moment the plan stopped working the way it was supposed to, is also the moment the suspect left behind the two pieces of evidence that now sit at the center of this investigation. The blood, which has been forensically analyzed by two of the most credentialed experts in the country, and the hair, A single strand of rootless hair that is currently being processed at a San Francisco laboratory that has already proven to the world it can convert that exact type of evidence into an identity. Think about what that means practically. Even if the person who took Nancy Guthrie has never been arrested, even if they have never submitted their DNA to any public database, even if they have never had a single interaction with law enforcement in their entire life, the science of genetic genealogy means they can still be found. Not through a direct match, but through family, through distant relatives, through shared patterns in DNA that connect people across generations whether they know it or not. C.C. Moore, one of the foremost experts in this discipline, said publicly this week that if this hair belongs to the suspect, it will solve the case. She has done it 6 times before with rootless hair alone. She is not speaking theoretically, she is speaking from documented experience. And here is something worth understanding about where the investigation stands institutionally right now. The 11-week delay that kept that hair sample in a private Florida laboratory is over. The evidence is where it needs to be. The sheriff's personal history with the FBI and the friction that history created between 2 agencies that should have been working seamlessly together from day one is now publicly documented on the record by a named Pima County official. That documentation matters because it creates accountability, and accountability changes behavior going forward. The impersonator, the California man named Colella, who sent fake Bitcoin ransom texts to the Guthrie family and exploited their pain for personal gain, is going to trial on June 23rd in Tucson. That chapter of this case is being handled. The noise that surrounded the ransom narrative for the first 11 weeks of this investigation is being cleared away. And what is left underneath that noise is the physical and behavioral evidence that Brian Entin and the experts he has worked with have been methodically piecing together since the beginning. One suspect, one prior visit to that porch, captured on camera on January 11th, 3 weeks before the night Nancy disappeared. One person who studied that home, its camera positions, its lighting, its routines, and the daily life of one 84-year-old woman who lived alone and had no reason to expect what was coming. One strand of hair left behind in a moment when the plan began to fall apart. And one laboratory with a proven track record of doing exactly what needs to happen next. Nancy Guthrie raised 3 children on her own after losing her husband at 46 years old. She built a full life in Tucson over 5 decades. She sat in the same church pew for 30 years. She was sharp, she was present, and according to everyone who knew her, she was completely aware of what was happening when that door opened in the middle of the night. She deserves an answer. Her family has not stopped searching, not stopped hoping, and not stopped waiting. And they have made clear that they are prepared to support anyone who helps bring her home. The combined reward in this case is now $1.2 million, $100,000 offered by the FBI, $1 million offered by the Guthrie family directly. If you have any information, no matter how small it seems, no matter how uncertain you feel about whether it matters, please make the call. You can reach the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That number again is 1-800-225-5324. You can also submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov or contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 5203-514-900. You can remain completely anonymous. Your name never has to come up. What you know just has to come forward. Because somewhere out there, someone saw something in the weeks before February 1st. A car that lingered too long. A face that didn't quite belong. A conversation that felt slightly off afterward. Those details are the ones that close cases like this. Not always the big dramatic moment. The quiet things someone almost kept to themselves. If you have been following this case, leave a comment below and tell us which development this week you believe brings investigators closest to a name. The hair sample at the San Francisco lab, Jim Clemente's blood spatter analysis, the Colella indictment, or the public revelation about Sheriff Nanos and the 11-week delay. We read every single comment, and your perspective matters here. If this coverage has been helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications. The moment that laboratory produces a result on that hair sample, this channel will break it down completely, what it means, where it points, and what it does to every other piece of evidence this investigation has been building since February 1st. Nancy Guthrie is still out there, and this case is not over.